Good evening to our viewers from around the world, and welcome to our weekly CJL Fireside Chat, wherever you are. Tonight, we are privileged and honored, truly honored, to have with us Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. We thank you, Ambassador, for taking time out from your extremely busy schedule. And I understand even now you have issues and challenges ahead at all times, and no doubt God will give you the wisdom and courage to overcome. We thank you for coming tonight to share your experiences gained from defending Israel and the Jewish people in one of the most challenging front lines. Just a short background about our ambassador. Danon is Israel's permanent representative to the United Nations, I believe since 2015. Previously served as a member of the Knesset from the Likud party, as well as Minister of Science, Technology and Space and Deputy Defense Minister. During his term in the 18th Knesset, Danon served as Deputy Speaker, Chair of the Special Committee on the Rights of the Child, and Chair for Immigration, Absorption and Diaspora Affairs, which we will discuss tonight too. Danon was elected also as Chair of the United Nations Legal Committee. Now, I'm sure whoever is listening carefully, you no doubt be not surprised that this is the first Israeli to ever held that position. He is also the author of a book published in 2010, available on Amazon. I just purchased it, called Israel, the Will to Prevail, a fascinating account, personal account about his upbringing, his education, and most importantly, his ideology in carrying out this very important mission. So to begin, to get straight into it, obviously I read the book, and I strongly encourage everyone who is listening tonight to buy the book again, Israel, the Will to Prevail, which is available, like most other things today, on Amazon. So you're right at the very beginning, there were two things that were fundamental in my house. And this is obviously due to your parents, and particularly your father, your late father. The first was getting to know the land. Can you please elaborate on that? And how has that experience affected your ideology?
Thank you very much, Rabbi, for having me. I hope next time it will be in person. Either I will come to London, or we will do it in Jerusalem. But I want to thank you for your work and for your activities and for your spirit. So I grew up in a very Zionist house, a very Zionist home, where my father would encourage me to go and walk and learn about the history through hikes. And that's what I did. I was very young, and I started to travel in the country, sometimes with friends, sometimes by myself. Sometimes I even joined a tour of older people, just in order to get to know the land. And that was my first introduction to Jewish history. Everywhere you walk in Israel, you learn about our history, you learn about the Bible stories, whether it's in the Shomron, whether it's in the Galilee, Mount Gilboa. So that's how I got actually introduced to become active and to care about what's happening in Israel. And through geography, I became a very active Zionist, even in the elementary school, and then in high school. I got into arguments with my teachers, my principal. I was very vocal. And once I graduated the military as an officer, I knew I want to continue to be active. And I continue with promoting Zionism, Jewish education, and that led me to politics. And here I am today, standing proudly and representing not only Israel, but the entire Jewish world at the United Nations.
That's fantastic, and obviously a strong encouragement to all our listeners, young or old. We know Israel, we think we know Israel, but there's a lot more we can learn literally by walking the land. I believe when God spoke to Abraham at the very beginning, he uses those words, walk the land to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. So certainly it is premised on getting to know the land firsthand. You also mentioned in the book something that you learned from your father, which seems mundane, but obviously in your current capacity is fundamental. And that is he encouraged you, strongly encouraged you to develop the ability to take a stand, to take a stand when you believed in something, to voice it, to be assertive. Do you think that comes naturally to Jews? And what do you think about Israelis? Does it come natural to them to take a stand vis-a-vis Israel, the outside world, or maybe the opposite? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think overall, as Israelis, we tend to argue more than anyone else. But in terms of the standing up for your principles, that's something that I took from my parents, my father and my mother. I recall that I was 10 years old, and I came home and I told my mother that I had an argument with my teacher about the Altelena, the boat that brought weapons to the underground in Israel. And I read what were the facts about the Altelena, and the teacher said it was not the facts and it was not true. And my mother told me, don't listen to your teacher. What you told her was right, go back tomorrow and tell her that she was wrong publicly and bring the book with you. That's exactly what I did. So I think when you educate your children to speak up, they have the ability in the future to do that. And that's what I'm doing today in public life. I stand for my principles. Sometimes I pay a price for it, but it gives me a lot of strength to know that you have the ability to stand up and to speak up.
Obviously, that's fantastic, and it's fundamental if you're doing something like you're doing. And you're right; it's a Jewish thing, it's an Israeli thing, and obviously you had great parents who instilled those values in you from a very, very young age. So obviously, well done to them. I just a few things from the book which I thought were quite remarkable and different sort of reading than you are accustomed to. And I just want to quote and ask you a question to comment. You write there, I represent a new generation of leaders who see Israel taking a different and more autonomous path that it has over the past several decades. And an outlook, you say, that echoes that of our founding generation. So first of all, can you please elaborate on that? And also how that manifested itself amongst the founding generation to have that more autonomous and independent stand? And why do you think that changed in the interim phase? And how is that expressing itself today, particularly through your efforts? So there's a bunch of questions there, but I think you get the idea.
So I think my generation of Israelis who were born in Israel, brought up in Israel, served in the military, we feel very confident about our ideas, about our values, and how to implement them. And when you look back about the founders of the State of Israel, they were great leaders, and I admire them. But many of them always looked at the diaspora, or they always looked outside of Israel to get the approval of other nations. And I think that's a mistake. I think the strength is in Israel. Mitzion tetzeh Torah. So you have to look into Jerusalem, which is the center, get the strength, and implement your ideas. And, in my book, I speak a lot about Golda Meir, when during the Yom Kippur War, she made huge mistakes because she always thought about what Mr. Kissinger would say about my decisions. And that's something I learned that I will never do. Yes, we are respectful. And as we speak today, Rabbi, tomorrow I will speak in the Security Council of the UN about applying sovereignty. Some call it annexation. And I will say it. We will do what is good for Israel, period. Yes, we will talk with our allies. We will speak with them. We are open to criticism. But at the end of the day, we have to take the decisions that are beneficial for the Jewish people. And this is the responsibility of a leader. And I think today we see more and more leaders who are doing that. We are respectful, but at the same time, we are not afraid to take our own decisions.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you said at the end to be respectful. And I think also that when we act in a healthy, autonomous way, I think we gain more respect from people as a result. You say also in that book that what Israelis of my generation and the next must do to preserve the nation they love. Israel has no choice but to act assertively when necessary, even if that means doing so on its own, which is a point that you just mentioned. So my question is like this: how do you see that strategy playing out? And also, is there support, or how much support is there for this approach at home in Israel? And what's the trend there amongst the young? And also, how do you see this playing out, or this sort of strategy amongst the diaspora, Jews?
So I think we always have to look at the long run, not to look for an immediate success. And I think when you look at the leaders like David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin, when they decided to apply sovereignty over Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, it wasn't easy for them. They were criticized from the inside, from the outside. But at the end of the day, when we look at history, we appreciate their determination to take those strong decisions. So I know today leaders, we all look at the polls, at the newspapers, and we all want to get positive feedback from the people. But I think a strong leader should be capable of knowing that maybe he will be criticized, but for the long run, people will appreciate his decisions.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And as we mentioned before we started, obviously the famous cry from the officers in the Israeli army, starting from the Six-Day War, before and after, was "Acharai, follow me." Sometimes you need courageous people who lead the way. And here, obviously, we're talking about in diplomacy and in politics beyond Israel, people like yourself, Ambassador, to be strong and courageous. And please God, the people who are watching, Jews and non-Jews alike, will be inspired as a result. Moving on a little, obviously, your main focus for the past few years has been the United Nations. As we say, Israel, defending Israel amongst the nations. So obviously you speak there, and there are numerous and extremely wide range of audiences. Included among them is the Israeli audience, the worldwide Jewish audiences, and the in close proximity, a quite hostile UN audience. Where is your main focus? Who are you talking to? How do you prioritize those wide range of audiences?
So it depends. It depends. But I think when you stick to the fact and to the truth, it will go everywhere. So in one of the discussions in the Security Council, the German ambassador challenged me about our rights to build in Judea and Samaria. And he told me, like, what is the legal argument for that? And I told him I will answer that in our next meeting, because we just made the comment at the end of the meeting. And at the beginning of the next meeting, I delivered a speech. Today you can look it up. It's called the Bible speech, where I spoke about our rights to the land. And I started with Abraham. I took the Bible, I showed it to the ambassador, and I told him, this is our deed to the land. Can you show us anything else that anyone else has a deed for the land? And I told him, for me, that's enough. I don't need more than that. But if you need more than that, let's talk about history. And I laid out our historical rights to the land. And at the end, I laid out the international law, the Balfour Declaration, San Remo Conference. And at the beginning, I spoke to the German ambassador. But apparently, it became viral, this speech. And hundreds of thousands of people watched it. In different languages it was translated. Many of the Jews around the world were exposed to this speech. And when I started to answer the ambassador, I answered only his question from the previous debate. But actually, I delivered a strong message that echoed to millions of Jews, Christians, and Muslims who were exposed to this strong message.
Well, that's obviously very well known, and I remember it at the time, incredibly inspiring. And as you said, a pure truth transcends the divide. and impacts everyone. So, again, that certainly has a major impact. Let me ask you, what was the response from that speech from the locals, as in your diplomats at the UN? I mean, obviously, this is not conventional stuff played out. It's not even something they're used to, as coming from other Israeli representatives, ambassadors to the UN over the years. So how do they interpret that? How do you think they absorb or digest this sort of very courageous, non-apologetic presentation of the rights of Israel?
So everybody had an opinion to that speech, to that quote. Some loved it and got connected to it. And as I mentioned, some of the Muslims also got inspired by it. But some Europeans told me, how can you come to the UN and speak about the Bible? We are in the world of diplomacy. And I told him, I laid our fact and the truth, and you cannot deny it. And I proved him where it all started. And I think that they learn to appreciate. Maybe they don't agree with that. Maybe they do not believe in God, or they don't believe in the Bible. But I think the stronger determination that we are, and I think it's very important, because sometimes the other side, the Palestinians, they speak about their rights all the time, and nobody speaks about our rights. And it looks like that we are the bad guy, that we took something. And I said, no, we are not taking anything. The connection between the Jews and the land of Israel is something that goes back thousands of years ago. It's not something that started in 1948, and we can prove it. So, and I want to add to that, Rabbi, I took to Israel more than 100 ambassadors on missions that I led. And on the missions, when I took them and I showed them the city of David, and when I showed them the connection, and actually touched the stones in the old city of Jerusalem, and they saw the archaeological facts, they changed their mind about it. But for many ambassadors who have no clue, they're sitting at the UN. For me, speaking about Abraham, or about the Second Temple, it was hard, but I think overall we got more respect for that.
Yeah, you just reminded me that our mutual friend, Mr. Eduardo Azar, who introduced me to you, and we're thankful to him for your being here tonight. I actually took him. He came to Israel, and he said, "I have two events. I want you to organize something special. Where should I go?" And I took him to Ir David. We got a special tour. They showed us something underground before they actually, I understand now it's opened up. And I also a helicopter ride over the, Jerusalem and that whole area. And he came away saying something very insightful, very simple, very insightful. And that was that the international leaders and diplomats that come to Israel, the first place they should come, even before Yad Vashem, is Ir David. Because when you tell a story, you want to start from the very beginning. So I thought that was, again, along the lines of what you just said. What are the ideas? Obviously, a lot of it is ideological, and you're out there and you need the courage and the inspiration and the motivation to constantly reinforce your determination against the odds. What are the ideas in Judaism that have influenced your work on a daily basis to get out there in that hostile environment? And also, can you talk about any historical figures, either from way back in the past or even modern 20th century Jews, leaders who inspire you?
So I think that the value of Kol Israel Arevim Ze Leze, that we have to stand together, that's something which I learned to appreciate here at the UN. I came from Israeli government and Israeli politics, whereby for many years I was in the Knesset, I was Deputy Minister of Defense, Minister in the government, and we argue so much in the Knesset day and night. But when I came to the UN, I realized that our adversaries, they do not make the distinction between left and right. They do not make the distinction between conservative or orthodox. They hate us, period. And they fight against us. And I think it's important that we are capable of coming together and standing together and standing And that's what I told my colleagues in Israel. Yes, we can argue about everything, but we have to stand united against our enemies. And that's what I did here at the UN. And I took a lot of inspiration from the late Menachem Begin, who was a great leader, and I'm gonna tomorrow when I will speak in the Security Council, I will quote his speech when he decided to apply sovereignty on the Golan Heights, and he always believed in our biblical rights and historical rights to the land. And I think today, when I implement the same ideology but with different tools, I think I can look back at him with admiration. And I also, when I speak with my colleagues, I tell them, you criticize us a lot, but Menachem Begin, when he got elected, he signed a peace treaty with the Egyptians because he saw that he's a real partner and he was willing to pay a price for that. Today, you want us to pay a price without even seeing any partner, and that will not happen. Yes, we are open-minded, we are willing to negotiate, but we are not willing to compromise our land. And I think those messages of Menachem Begin are valid until today.
Yeah, look, he certainly was a great man, and I think even across the board, he's respected universally. Along the lines of this courage and this, this proud approach that you have, I understand that it was a joint effort between yourself and the US ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, where after so many years, the United Nations has recognized the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, as an official holiday. So we recognize at least as much as other people are. Obviously, a great achievement. What does that mean actually to you personally?
I think it's very meaningful because before we passed that, I remember that there was a debate in the General Assembly, and President Obama was speaking there, and for sure we were not there. We were in the shul for Yom Kippur, and I had to call him to explain why we would be not sitting in the room. And I think that it's okay to respect Christmas. It's okay to respect Eid al-Fitr. But it's also okay to respect Yom Kippur. We are a member state of the UN, and the same way they respect other holidays, I insist that they respect our holidays as well. It wasn't easy. We had a lot of issues with the union at the UN, but we got it done. And I think that is the approach, that we are not asking for charity. We are a member state, a proud one. We are paying our dues, and we expect people to treat us that way.
So another illustration of an approach of, that courage and that determination. Obviously, a lot of obstacles, but if you do, then they do recognize and respect us as a result. So again, that's a remarkable achievement, and kol hakavod to you. I'm sure you know that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had a profound impact on Prime Minister Netanyahu while serving at the UN. His famous anecdote, as a matter of fact, I happened to be in the synagogue in 770 Eastern Parkway in that famous Simchat Torah. When we all waited for a long time, we saw this young guy, no one knew who he was, and there you had a man who we were told could speak the language very well, and we were all looking forward to his progress. So there, very famously, and I believe Netanyahu mentioned this talk at the UN, at the General Assembly a few years back, where the Rebbe talked about the UN being a house of darkness in a hostile place, one of the most hostile places in the world, but at the same time said to him, and using the quote, "Ma'at or docha harbe min hachoshech," a little bit of light dispels much darkness. You see, the battle between darkness and light, sometimes a room is filled with darkness and you're overwhelmed and you don't know, and you lose courage. But then if you know the little bit of light can dispel a lot of darkness, and that's your mission at the UN. Serving in the UN, and you're there firsthand, how do you relate to that anecdote?
So first, I attend the Tziyun of the Rabbi many times when I look for inspiration before crucial moments or speeches. And I always think about that event when Prime Minister Netanyahu who back then was the ambassador to the UN, met the rabbi, and I think that the rabbi had the ability, was so sharp, so he spoke exactly to the point. And today, we look at it. Still today, the UN is still a dark place. They are still very hostile to Israel, but with the light, with the truth, we are able to make the change, and we see more and more countries are becoming closer to Israel. So I'm optimistic about our standing at the UN. I think with our technology and innovation, we can bring more countries to our side. And we should remember that at the end of the day, we believe in tikkun olam, helping others. And I think that the more we'll do, the more respect we will get. And even now, when we had the corona pandemic, I was very proud to see that we sent help and guidance to other countries. Even though we are a small country, we were able to help others.
And that's wonderful. That's all wonderful. Obviously, it continues to be an uphill battle, but maybe even we're gaining momentum, and it becomes, even though the battle continues, there's more momentum on our side. There's a famous phrase. I always remember this as a kid. Am levadad yishkon, a people that dwells alone. You being in the UN, you must have particular insight played out on a daily basis. So is it a blessing or is it a curse? And do you see a time where Israel and the Jewish people will be more recognized, will be a nation like all others, or will be more respected than it currently is?
So, frankly, I don't think that we are alone anymore. Yes, publicly, you will see a lot of hatred and anti-Israel resolutions. But publicly, I was able to build bridges with so many ambassadors, so many countries, and to understand that they really appreciate, they even admire us. So I think the challenge is now is to take it from the private field and make it public, and to convince them to actually acknowledge what we are doing. Some of the Arab countries, African countries, and today, when we look at Israel, we have diplomatic relations with more than 160 countries out of the 193 member states of the UN. And we have a lot of friends that publicly will not recognize it. But, I was in Dubai, I was in other Arab countries. We are doing a lot of things with them. And I think we should push them more now and ask them to actually recognize what we are doing. So I'm optimistic about our future.
That's very encouraging to hear, and please God, that silent majority becomes again more assertive in speaking their minds and not to be wholly politically correct. Aliyah is a big thing of yours, and you mentioned before the pandemic that the world is currently experiencing these extraordinary times in which we find ourselves. Hopefully a vaccine or other types of cures for the COVID-19 will be found soon. Do you see Israel as a future for young Jewish people who are looking for a new home after the crisis? And can Israel be a stable refuge, socially and economically, in its ability to integrate all these people? So post-pandemic and the impact that it's had on many, many people, disrupting their lives, many people reevaluating their priorities. Do you see this as an opportunity and a moment where there's even more aliyah from Europe, from America, from South America, and other parts of the world?
Absolutely, and we are already seeing the rising numbers. And you always have the argument whether you want aliyah by choice or aliyah because of something else. And I think we should be very grateful for every ole who is coming to Israel. And even during the crisis, the gates of Israel were open to every Jew who wanted to make aliyah.
Wow.
And we live all around the world who came to Israel. I believe that we should actually grant every Jew in the world aliyah certificate and actually give it to him if he wants to have it.
Wow.
So he will have it in his house, and he will decide when to actually make the move and come to Israel. I think it's very symbolic. I think it will increase the numbers of Olim, and Aliyah is a blessing. Look at the Olim from the former Soviet Union, and I know that our friend Eduardo is very active in the former Soviet Union. And you look at what we achieved in Israel today with the startup nation, and we have to acknowledge, because we had a great educated Olim who came from the former Soviet Union and gave us the support we needed. So I'm a big supporter of Aliyah, and I think we should actually take advantage of the situation and encourage people, and make it easier for them to explore the opportunities to come to Israel.
Look, I think it's the first time I'm hearing an idea, a suggestion like that. I can tell you, in working with a lot of young people, particularly in Europe, I can tell you it's not just, it is symbolic in a way, but sometimes symbolic gestures have an impact beyond the symbolism. And I think, what it demonstrates to people, to Jews, is they actually are stakeholders. They are shareholders, if I may say, in the land of Israel. The Lubavitcher Rebbe would quote from the Talmud that every single Jew not just has a portion in the world to come, but has a portion in Israel. And therefore, it was the reason why he justified commenting on Israel. He says, because I'm a stakeholder, like every single other Jew is a stakeholder. I'm a child of Abraham. It's given to all of us, and therefore I'm part of the dialogue. So, I think it's an incredibly good idea, and it shouldn't have an expiry date. It should hang on people's walls, and people should know that. And I'm sure it will have a very positive impact. So if you can get that done once you finish your work outside of Israel, that would be an amazing thing. Education has been a big thing of yours for adults and children. What inspired you to do this sort of work, the education? And if you can focus on diaspora Jews for a moment, obviously you've lived in the diaspora for quite a few years now in your position as ambassador to the UN. So in terms of educating themselves, and this is specifically for diaspora Jews, should we focus more on our own Jewish history and values? And what about navigating our host countries and citizens for selling Israel's cause? How do you square that Jewish identity and connection to Israel versus being at home and comfortable with our local societies?
So for me, it was always and still is a crucial issue, the Jewish identity. I'm very worried about the assimilation, and I think we should fight together against it. And the first thing to do is to educate the next generation, our children, our grandchildren, get them more involved with Jewish life, get them more involved with Israel, bring them to Israel as much as we can. And I think we should have a better dialogue between Israel and the diaspora. And as an Israeli who lived in the diaspora now for 5 years, I can say that we can also learn from our friends here in the diaspora, about Jewish life, about Jewish tradition, and it's not black and white. My kids, they all attended the Jewish schools here in New York, Jewish camps, and we were exposed to great experiences that I'm gonna bring back to Israel. And I think we should have a better dialogue. Usually, when you hear about any kind of interaction between Israel and the diaspora, it's about a conflict, a crisis, an argument. It shouldn't be that way. It should be a regular dialogue about daily issues, about educating our children, keeping them involved, keeping them aware of our past, present, and future. And I think we should invest more in that.
And it's certainly, I believe, it's certainly the trend of the Israeli government, obviously inspired and guided by the current leadership, to realize, to recognize the important role that diaspora Jews can have on Israel. It works both ways, and I think you've summarized, what Israel should do for diaspora, and what diaspora should do for Israel. Let me ask you a question. Obviously, the Jews are influential in varying degrees in their respective countries, in Europe and America particularly. But What sort of model could you suggest? And obviously, you've been exposed to this this community firsthand. How do we embolden diaspora Jews, who are relatively a small percentage of the world, to influence and shape their respective government's positions? What would you say in general, and what would you say particularly to the young?
So I think it goes about being involved. I will not go into internal issues. I think we have to respect the sovereign governments, and when we have issues of anti-Semitism, and unfortunately we have it everywhere in the US, in the UK, you name it. We expect the local government to take actions. Yes, we care about it. Yes, we are together, but at the end of the day, it is the responsibility of the local authorities. So I think that I would advise my friends in the diaspora to be active, to be involved, to get the authorities more involved with Jewish life, Jewish education, not to be afraid, not to be isolated, and not to be shy about their Jewishness, about their community. In some of the communities, it's easier than others, but I think at the end of the day, when you look where you have a strong Jewish community, it's also contributing to that community, to that city, to that state. The Secretary General of the UN today, his name is Antonio Guterres. He is the former Prime Minister of Portugal. And I had him for a Shabbat dinner in my house with my wife, Tali, and my kids. And during Shabbat dinner, he told me, Danny, Portugal used to be a very strong and rich country. But when we expelled the Jews, and they expelled all the Jews from Portugal, in Spain, some were left. For Portugal, they expelled all of them. When we expelled them, from that moment, look what happened to Portugal. We became the poorest country in Europe since then, and we still are struggling. And most of the Jews that immigrated to the Netherlands, and the economy in the Netherlands boomed after that. So it's not only about helping our community, but it's also contributing to the country where you have Jewish presence.
Well, that's a remarkable story, and obviously it's a shame. You see, majority of people don't think that those dialogues, those conversations, those private conversations actually take place between the head of the UN and the Israeli ambassador to the UN. I don't know, maybe one day you can publish a lot of those off the record conversations, because that will be extremely inspirational to many Jews and non-Jews alike. Incidentally, I'm sure you remember Portugal was the country, the only European country that allowed for the rearmament of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. So that massive rearmament was only made possible by Portugal, the only country in the entire Europe. So please God, they should be blessed. You mentioned before about, sometimes the diaspora involvement in Israel is only in a very heated political context. What ideas, what suggestions do you have of creating a depoliticized dialogue between diaspora Jews and Israel? So it should be on an ongoing basis, but not about the things we don't have in common, but that which we do have in common. I remember on one of our trips to Israel, Alan Dershowitz told us, he says, in Israel, 90% we have in common, 10% we don't have in common. The problem is that 90% of the time we focus on the 10%. So how do we change that?
So I think by exposing the facts, and bringing more people to Israel. Here in the US, there was a lot of issues with the wall, with the Kotel HaMa'aravi, and most people were ignorant about the situation there. And I told them, you know what, you need to take a plane, come to Israel and see it for yourself, and see that you can go, you can pray, it's open 24/7. And I think that sometimes when we leave it to the professional, and I'm talking about both sides, sometimes the leadership from both sides, for them it's easier to speak about the conflict and to gather support around an argument. I think it should be the opposite. We should gather support around a dialogue and have more engagement. And you will find out that the majority of Israelis are open-minded to their brothers and sisters in the diaspora. And I'm sure the people in the diaspora will be amazed to see the spirit of the Israelis, their connection to the Judaism and tradition. I think we have to do more of that.
No, that's certainly the case. Anyone who's been to Israel, certainly, I heard this from the founder of EasyJet, who said that he did when his planes were flying from the UK to Israel in the beginning, he said they did a survey, and the result of the survey was that anyone who had gone to Israel had a better appreciation and respect for Israel than they had before, which is quite remarkable. Reaching back to 1948, the beginning of the state of Israel, and now living in 2020. And obviously, there are, in certain regards, ever exponential hostilities together with Israel's quality to respond to those threats. Are you more confident now of Israel's future?
I am. We are a strong country, a strong nation. We have our friends all around the world. We have strong Jewish communities. Our economy is a strong economy. And even at the UN, if you have a survey at the UN about the strongest countries in the world, you will be shocked to find out that we are not in the top 5, but we're in the top 10. And sometimes I tell my colleagues, we have 8 million people. Look at our numbers, but because we are so energetic, we are very involved. People appreciate that, and I think our standing today is in a higher position than in the past. I'm optimistic about the future. I think we have to focus on the issue of the unity, because the minute we will speak only about arguments and elections and divisions, then it's dangerous for us. So I think we have to invest more on that to make sure that we stay united. We know how to face our enemies. But overall, I'm very optimistic about our future.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and certainly unity throughout has always been incredibly important. And please God, that unity can be affected. Because I once heard a speech from Chief Rabbi Lau, the father, who said that even in Washington, when talking amongst various State Department officials, he said that we don't appreciate how much weight they place on a unified position coming out of Israel. So when it's not unified, they feel they can challenge it, but when it's unified, they know they can't. So, Ambassador, maybe once you do come to Israel, you will come up with ideas where we can focus more on that which unites us than that which divides us. Certainly will attract a lot of blessings. The end of each tefillah prayer, we say 3 times a day, we say, Barcheinu Avinu Kulanu Ke'echad. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe would always say that the blessing comes when we are Kulanu, every single one of us, each and every one of us has to play our role. But number 2, it has to be Ke'echad, all as one. So anyway, Ambassador, I understand I was told by your team that you have very pressing things to take care of, as we mentioned before, and we wish you well, Hatzlacha, in your tremendously important position representing, it's not just Israel, as you know, it's representing every single Jew, wherever they are in the world, whether they know it or they don't know it. So just a few closing remarks. Again, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I saw this quote the other day from Ben Gurion, I'm sure you know it, that a Jew, in order to be a realist, must believe in miracles. So it is true, as you have very beautifully illustrated, that when we are proud of our identity, with a clear sense of mission and purpose, we can act independently and assertively. And as you said, history has demonstrated the results are nothing short of miraculous. So again, we wish you well in representing the Jewish people. And if you are the man, our man, in the UN, in this very challenging responsibility, God has certainly empowered you with those strengths. So We're relying on you. Obviously, we'll play our part too, to continue in that courageous way, filled with wisdom, as inspired by your parents. And please God, we should be a light unto the nations, and we wish you tremendous strength and health for you and all your family, and we should share only good news. Ambassador, it was a pleasure, and we thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you, Eduardo, and all of my dear friends. I really enjoyed our conversation. Now I have to get back to get ready, and you are invited to join me tomorrow at 9 a.m. New York time. We're going to be doing a Zoom debate in the Security Council, where we discuss some of the issues we spoke about here today. So thank you very much, and stay optimistic. Thank you.
So stay positive. Thank you, Ambassador. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.